Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Lon Schiffbauer, and today we're asking the question, what are ethics? Now, ethics, it's one of those words that you've heard it 1,000 times, and you've probably used it in a sentence or two. But can you define it? That's a little more difficult. So what we're going to do today is define ethics and talk about how they're used in our decision-making processes. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start with a standard dictionary definition of ethics, but don't worry, we'll put it in English, okay? So, ethics are standards of behavior. Standards of behavior. Now, those two words alone mean an awful lot. Standards meaning this is what society has kind of determined is the standard response, the normal response, the expected response. Standards of behavior, how we act, how we behave. Okay, standards of behavior that tell us how humans ought to act, behave, act, in the many situations in which we find ourselves. We are in different social contexts all the time. We are friends, we're parents, we're children, we're citizens, we're business people, we're teachers, we're professionals, we're public servants, and so on. So, in other words, every time we occupy a different social sphere, we should act and behave according to standards that have been established through ethics. Okay, great. What does this really mean? Well, to really explain what ethics are, I want to talk about what ethics are not. Let's first explore values, a personal value that you or I might hold. So, for example, I always try to tell the truth. All right? This is a personal guiding principle of mine. Every one of us has personal guiding principles, values that we consider to be core to who we are and really drive and dictate our behavior. And so, as for myself, I try to tell the truth. Okay, fine. But then that brings us to morals. Morals are values that are codified by the community. So, for example, thou shalt not bear false witness is a Judeo-Christian codification. I don't know if that's a word or not, but that is a codified value. Here's the idea. We live in a society, we live together, and hey, we all have this value, or at least the majority of us have this value that, hey, I always try to tell the truth. And society looks around and says, you know what? It would really be to our advantage as a community if we all adopted this value of trying to tell the truth. Therefore, we're going to codify it. We are going to make it something official. Now, oftentimes when something is made official, it's made official through, say, religion, in this case, a Judeo-Christian commandment. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all codification of values, once again, that word that I don't know is real or not, have to necessarily be religious in nature. It could just be some sort of community, group, fraternity, sorority, who knows what, that kind of says, hey, in our codes of conduct, we are going to say as a community, as a group, we are going to recognize this particular value as being relevant to all of us. Okay, so then that brings us to a law. All right, what's a law? A law is something that is enforced with consequences. So in the case of telling the truth, we have laws regarding libel, slander, and perjury. These are all laws in place supporting this idea of always trying to tell the truth. So now we've gone from a personal value or guiding principle to one that the community at large has said, you know what, we really ought to adopt this as a guiding principle in our community, to now attaching actual enforcement policies and practices and authorities to it, as well as having consequences attached. Okay? So then, what's an ethic? Well, it's the best thing to do given the circumstances. That's all an ethic really is. Given the situation we're in and the social sphere in which we are inhabiting, the context, what is the appropriate course of action? So, for example, as a parent, I told my kids, yes, there's a Santa Claus. Now, just so you know, I have broken my value of always. So, by the way, spoiler alert, if you don't know, there's no Santa Claus. Okay? I know, just so you know. Okay, so I have broken my personal guiding principle. I did not tell the truth when I said there's a Santa Claus. First of all, I bore false witness. I said, I know there's a Santa Claus. I've seen there's a Santa Claus. I've seen evidence that there is a Santa Claus. I bore false witness. Furthermore, I perjured myself. I lied. So why would it be considered ethical or not? The argument could be totally made that I behaved unethically. Why could it be considered ethical to tell the kid that there's a Santa Claus? Well, listen, in the context of a parent with a small child growing up in a predominantly Christian or Judeo-Christian, but predominantly Christian society in which everyone around us is perpetuating this myth and story of Santa Claus, it just is easier and it has certain magic attached to it. And I remember believing in Santa Claus and yada, yada, yada. So once again, ethics, they're not personal values, they're not morals, they're not laws. They're what's the best thing to do in the situation. And yes, many laws can be considered unethical, and many times when you're acting ethically, you may be breaking a law. All right, so let's continue on. Here's the thing about ethics. They really try to guide us when we run into ethical dilemmas. An ethical dilemma is when you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, between a rock and a hard place, when no course of action is prima facie the best, wonderful, most fantastic course of action. It's basically anything you do is going to carry with it a consequence. So, for example, if you're like a parent who has to make the decision whether or not to send a sick kid to school and make that really important meeting in which you're meeting with this high-end client, or keep the kid home from school and skip that important meeting, that's an ethical dilemma. Some folks would say, listen, the kid's hardly sick. It doesn't matter. Sick kids go to school all the time. I went to school all the time. You know what? Just take a shower, make your bed. You'll feel better. Send the kid to school and go off and meet your responsibility to this client. Somebody else might say, are you kidding me? You know what? The kid and the safety of everybody at school is paramount. Keep the kid home. Yes, I know the kid fakes being sick a lot, but you can never be too careful. And work should always take second place to a perhaps sick kid, right? This is an ethical dilemma. No matter which course of action you choose, it's going to carry a consequence and not an attractive one. So with that in mind, let's look at 5 of many possible ethical approaches, okay? As it says here, we are going to make ethical decision-making clear as mud. Yeah, there is no right answer. If there was a right answer, there would be no ethical dilemma. The appropriate course of action would be obvious. Okay, so let's start out. The first one I want to look at is the utilitarian or common good approach. So you run into this. There's that quote from Spock in Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. In the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church, their scripture has a quote that says, "It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in disbelief," okay, in unbelief. So the idea here is that It's okay to sacrifice one for the good of the many, these two quotes. So, what does this have to do with utilitarianism? Well, it basically deals with consequences. In utilitarianism, the ends justify the means. If the ends are just fantastically fantastic, amazing, great, positive ends, and it cost us a little bit to get there, then that's okay. The most ethical action is the one that does the greatest good for the greatest number while doing the least harm to the fewest. Okay? It calls attention to the common conditions that are important to the welfare of everyone. Laws, effective police and fire departments, healthcare, a public educational system, and so forth. These are all part of kind of the common good approach. Now, for example, my wife is an X-ray technologist, so she takes X-rays. Well, I got news for you. When you get an X-ray done, you are dosed with a certain amount of radiation. Now, by the way, you're dosed with more radiation when you fly in an airplane than you are when you're in an X-ray exam, okay? But nevertheless, you are dosed, and they actually have to keep track of how much they are dosing you, how many X-rays they take, and how much radiation you imbibe. I don't know what the right word would be, because it's dangerous, right? But we are willing to pay that small price in danger, and trust me, folks, it is an incredibly small price. We're willing to pay that small price in danger for the good that would come out of being able to really diagnose whatever's going on inside of you so the doctor can treat you. It's the same thing with any medication you take. Any medication you take has a side effect, but we're willing to endure the consequences or risk of that side effect for the good that we get out of it. Okay? That is utilitarianism. Now, there are problems with utilitarianism. First of all, it requires us to assign values and benefits to harms resulting from our actions. So, how do you calculate how much good something is versus how much harm something is? Fails to consider the justice of the situation. So, for example, and this is an extreme example, common good approach says if a doctor has 10 patients who each needs a different organ, and these are all upstanding, fantastic, wonderful people, then it's okay to go off and murder some horrible, villain and take those organs and save the lives of these 10 wonderful people. So, first of all, I saved 10 lives and it only cost me one. Furthermore, these 10 lives were fine, upstanding, wonderful citizens, whereas this one was an awful villain. So, yeah, utilitarianism, this was a good call. Yeah, no, it wasn't. It does not consider justice. That would be a completely unjust scenario. Okay. Different people have different ideas about what constitutes the common good. What is the common good? I don't know that we could come to an agreement on this. There's also the free rider problem, kind of an unequal sharing of burdens. So, for example, childless property taxes going to education of children living in apartments. So, what do I mean? Well, here in the United States, property taxes, as a homeowner, I own a home, and my property taxes, for the most part, go to education. Whereas if you live in an apartment, you don't pay property taxes. So what if a couple, a person, is in a home with no children? They are paying property taxes for a family that is living in an apartment and is not paying those property taxes and yet has kids going to school. Those kids are benefiting from my taxes. Now, it's a common good. It's absolutely imperative to a country that we have an informed, educated, productive citizenry, and that means an education. But once again, this is where some people are paying for the common good of others. Finally, this conflicts with individualism, right? It forces the individual to conform with the collective. Okay, so now, as an ethical guideline, whenever a solution creates the greatest good while causing the least amount of harm, this is a good solution. So just how would you use this in your ethical decision making? All right, next one, the rights-based approach. Now, here in the United States, you would recognize terms like Congress shall make no law, no person shall be held, right to a speedy and public trial. The powers are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. These are from the Bill of Rights and U.S. Constitution and so forth. I don't know which one, but, I think it's both. I don't know. I could be wrong. But I know it's one or both of those. The point is, here in the United States, the U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights spell out what are rights that citizens have that the government cannot take away. So the rights-based approach basically says the most ethical course of action is the one that best protects and respects the moral rights of those affected. It starts from the belief that all humans have dignity based on their human nature per se, or their ability to choose freely and what to do with their lives. We all have this ability. That ability should be respected. No course of action should infringe upon our ability to make free and open choices for ourselves. On the basis of such dignity, they have the right to be treated as ends and not merely as means to other ends. So you can't use people to meet a greater objective if using those people infringes upon their rights, even if that greater objective is fantastic and marvelous. Okay? So, for example, I believe strongly in the right to free speech. And even though I believe that speech, including written and verbal communication, is the most powerful force in the universe that we wield and therefore potentially dangerous, I believe that we should protect free speech. This is me using a rights-based approach to my attitude toward free speech. Okay, well, what are the problems with this? There are many. Well, the list of moral rights is widely debated. What are the moral rights you have, intrinsic to who you are? All right, I believe you have the right to free speech. I believe you have the right to assembly. These are things that are ingrained in me because I, was born in and for the most part grew up in the United States. But I've heard you have the right to a livable wage. Do you have the right to a livable wage? You have the right to health care. Do you have the right to health care? I have my opinions regarding these things, but the point is we don't all agree. Okay. Tends to limit our vision of what a moral life entails. Right? It's kind of like, all right, if we are going to codify these rights, then that means that we have in our minds what is a moral life and what a moral life may not be. Relying exclusively on a rights-based approach tends to emphasize the individual at the expense of the community. So while the utilitarian approach emphasized the community and infringed upon the rights of the individual, this one does the opposite. It focuses on the rights of the individual at the expense of the community. Okay? So, as an ethical guide, whatever solution best protects the established individual rights of the citizen is the best approach. Okay, let's continue on. We have the fairness or justice approach, right? So, for example, all men are created equal. If you're here in the United States or you're familiar with United States kind of political theory, it is established in the, once again, Bill of Rights or Constitution. I'm embarrassing myself. This isn't my wheelhouse. But the idea And it's a principle or value because the very fact that we use men means that we are not all inclusive. But you see what I mean? It's an aspirational value. All people are created equal. All right. So what does this mean? It means all equals should be treated equally. If you and I are equal, which we are, right? If we're equal, we should be treated equally. It's pretty simple, except it's not. The most ethical actions treat all human beings equally, or if unequally, then fairly based on some standard that is defensible. Okay, so let's take, for example, wages, how much one earns. So my father-in-law was an airline pilot, okay? And in his own words, he said, I'm a glorified bus driver. Airline pilots and bus drivers, they both take a whole lot of people, put them in a can, and get them from point A to B. That's what airline pilots and bus drivers do. Well, then why are airline pilots paid more than bus drivers? Well, because there's more risk, there's my mouse, there's more risk involved for the pilot, and so greater remuneration, I don't know why I use that word, I can't say it, right? Greater remuneration, or is it remuneration? I don't know. Maybe I spelled that wrong. Anyway, you should get paid more, okay, because there's more risk involved. That's kind of the fairly defensible stance. All right, so continuing on, there are, of course, problems with this approach. Programs designed to address inequity and injustice can, for some, feel unjust for others, right? So how are you going to get everybody to agree on what is fair and just and equitable, especially when we live in such inequity and injustice? This is a sticky wicket, all right? It's also very difficult to weigh the demands of distributive, corrective, and compensatory justices. So distributive justice, the extent to which a society's institutions ensure that benefits and burdens are distributed in a way that are fair and just. They're not. Okay. Corrective justice, the extent to which punishments are fair and just. They're not. And compensatory justice, the extent to which people are fairly compensated for their injuries by those who have injured them. They're not. And in many cases, actually doing this would be nigh unto impossible. And so it's really difficult to conceive of a fair or just situation being perfectly distributed among all those concerned. All right, so as an ethical guide, whatever solution delivers the most equal services is the best solution. Okay, great. All right, next one, Kantian ethics, or the categorical imperative. Categorical imperative, that sounds pretty badass, doesn't it, right? Kantian ethics. So you've heard the phrase, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All right, from, I believe, the New Testament in the Christian Bible. But that sentiment is actually in many, many, many religions. Let's see, gosh, I can't think of her name right now. Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong is a theologian and author and so forth, and she has this organization in which she really kind of builds upon this idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because it is so ubiquitous throughout world religions. Anyway, let's keep going. So the categorical imperative says you can only do that which you would be comfortable allowing everyone else to do, including to you, right? So you can do it if everyone else can do it, and they can do it to you, and you would say, that's just fine, right? And so it really kind of asks the question, what would the world be like if we allowed everyone to do X and we were totally at peace with that, right? So, for example, well, let's look at an example, all right? All right, based on the categorical imperative and my time as an LDS missionary, I served an LDS Mormon mission in Japan for 2 years when I was younger. I therefore believe I am ethically obligated to invite missionaries from other denominations into my home. Since I went door to door as a missionary and said, "Hey, can I talk to you about religion?" I am morally obligated that when somebody knocks on my door and says, "Hey, you want to talk about religion?" I need to say yes, because I lived in and engaged in a world in which that was an appropriate behavior. Okay? So what goes around comes around, and I'm okay with that. I love talking religion. It's all good. All right. There are problems with this, to be sure. The most obvious of which is people tend to be more lenient on themselves and harsher on others. We want justice for those who have wronged us, but mercy for ourselves when we have wronged others. I mean, think about when you're driving. You see crazy drivers all over the time, and you take offense and you honk or you yell or you give some sort of gesticulation. But you know what, friends? You've done the same darn thing. We've all done it. We all are crazy drivers. And yet, somehow or another, when we see somebody else do something, oh, I wish there was a cop here to see that. But when we do it, and we get pulled over, we're like, oh, no, you have to understand. I was in a hurry. I didn't know. I didn't see. Please, please, please don't give me a ticket. Yeah, right. That's the issue with the categorical imperative. All right. So, as an ethical guideline, whatever solution you would willingly accept for yourself is the best solution. All right. Last one. The last one is the virtue approach. Now, this is a quote that is engraved upon the Statue of Liberty in the United States. A gift from France brought here to the United States. We set it up at, near Ellis Island in New York and New Jersey. And there engraved is, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Wow, that is pretty darn aspirational, because let's face it, America does not, has not, and I don't know that ever will, but I love it when I'm wrong. We don't practice this, and we never have practiced it. But it's aspirational, right? It's something we aspire to. We want to be that kind of person. So, the virtue approach says ethical actions ought to be consistent with certain ideal virtues that provide for the full development of our humanity. In other words, don't act as you are, act as you wish you were. Act in a way that is consistent with the sort of person you think you have the potential of being, a virtuous person. These virtues are dispositions and habits that enable us to act according to the highest potential of our character. Virtue ethics ask of any action, what kind of person will I become if I do this? Or is this action consistent with my acting at my best? Okay, so for example, I give a very small amount. I give a small amount, all right? I give a small amount to many charities. My logic being that if everyone were to give a small amount to many charities, then in aggregate, in total, we would be able to address a lot of major issues. Alone, I can't do a whole lot, but I try to give in such a way that I feel I am a virtuous person in support of charities in a way that I think is consistent with who I want to be and where I see us growing as a society. Okay. There's problems though, right? Nothing simple. It requires us to, agree as human beings on what kind of potential we can reach, agreement on what is a virtuous life. I don't know that we can agree on what constitutes a virtuous life. it can also vary from culture to culture as different cultures place different values on virtues, right? And ethics should not really be influenced that much by culture. It should be more ingrained in who we are as human beings, not as Americans or Britons or Chinese or Japanese or Hindus or what have you, right? Hindu's a religion, not a nationality. So Indians, there we go. All right. As an ethical guideline, whatever solution you would freely share with the community, with your mother watching, is the best solution. So the idea is any action you take, are you okay with your mother watching? With your mother finding out? With your boss finding out? So if your answer is, no, I don't want my mother seeing me doing this at the party, then no, that's not consistent with the virtue approach. All right? So there you go, folks. You have a competitive advantage because you have a greater understanding of how to weigh ethical dilemmas when making important decisions. So go off, use it, do something fantastic, and until we talk again, have a fantastic day.